We remember the day the sky went quiet. One moment there were birds. The next, only the wind remained. Giant obsidian ships had blotted out our sun. They hung there like geometric impossibilities, perfect angles in a world of soft curves. Their arrival was utterly silent. It was a silence that felt heavy, a silence that promised to last forever. The message came to every screen on the planet. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. The beings called themselves the Censors. They claimed to be guardians of cosmic harmony, a harmony our species had apparently been ruining. Our music, our symphonies, and our rock anthems, our lullabies and our love songs. All of it was noise. It was a chaotic vibration that disturbed the universe. Therefore, it had to stop. Immediately and completely. All instruments were to be surrendered. All recordings were to be deleted. To sing was an act of rebellion. To hum was a crime against the star-born order. They gave us one cycle to comply. After that, their enforcers would begin their work. They would scour our world for any trace of melody. We were a loud species. We were born with rhythm in our blood. Our hearts beat like drums in our chests. Now, they were telling us to be still, to be silent. They thought a mandate could erase who we were. They thought they could command our souls into submission. They were about to learn a very important lesson about us. We do not go quietly. So we fell silent on the surface. Public speakers played nothing but a dull, approved hum. The great concert halls gathered dust. Children were shushed for humming in the streets. We performed our compliance perfectly. The censors patrolled our cities in their floating, noiseless machines. They scanned for sonic deviations. For the first few weeks, they found nothing. But you cannot kill a song by silencing the singer. You can only make it a whisper. And our whispers started to connect. A secret network began to form. It moved through old data lines and forgotten radio frequencies. We called it the static, because that is what the censors heard, just meaningless noise at the edge of their sensors. Within that noise, we hid our echoes. The first broadcast was a simple piano melody, a piece by a long-dead composer named Chopin. It was faint, barely audible beneath the crackle. But for those of us listening, it was a thunderclap. It was a promise. We were still here. Our spirit was not broken. Soon, other echoes joined it. Old recordings of jazz from New Orleans, folk songs from the mountains of Appalachia, driving beats from the clubs of Berlin. Our entire musical heritage became a secret language. A ghost in the machine. It was a dangerous game. Getting caught meant disappearing. But the silence was a worse fate. We chose to risk it all for a single, forbidden note. In a soundproofed room beneath the city, a young woman named Alara worked. She was a composer. Before the silence, her music had filled theaters. Now she worked with instruments that made no sound. Her keyboard was connected to a light board. Each note she played became a pulse of color. She was composing by sight and by memory. Her burden was immense. She was not just writing a song, she was building an arc. The resistance had tasked her with creating a new anthem, a song that would carry everything we were. Hidden within its complex structure was a data packet, the compressed history of our species, our art, our science, our stories, our greatest triumphs and our deepest sorrows. It was all being woven into a melody. A song that could rebuild us if we were broken. The anthem had to be perfect. It needed a rhythm that felt like a human heartbeat. It needed a harmony that spoke of both pain and hope. It needed a crescendo that could shake the very stars. She worked for months, a ghost in a silent room. She poured all of our defiance into the composition, She wrote of starlight and campfires, of first loves and final goodbyes. The censors wanted to erase us. They wanted to make us a footnote in their silent history. Alara was ensuring we would have a voice, even if she was the only one who could not hear it. Far away, in a listening post, cloaked in a nebula, someone else heard. Her name was Lyra. She was of the Xylos, a species of archivists and observers. Her job was to catalog the whispers of the universe. She monitored dying stars and the formation of new galaxies. And sometimes, she listened to the broadcast traffic of developing worlds. The censors were a well-known force. They were seen as cosmic killjoys by most other races, an empire built on the arrogant belief that their way was the only way. Lyra had studied their path of enforced silence across the galaxy. She had seen countless cultures muted and diminished, but she had never seen one resist like this. Then, she intercepted the signal from Earth. It was weak, a flicker buried in cosmic background radiation. Her systems almost dismissed it as a data error. But something made her isolated. She filtered out the static, and there it was, a melody. It was unlike anything in her archives. It was mathematically complex, yet emotionally raw. The song seemed to evolve as she listened. It felt like a story being told in a language she could not speak, but could somehow understand. It held sorrow, yes, but it also held a ferocious, burning defiance. Lyra was a being of logic and data, but this music, it made her feel. And that was a dangerous, fascinating thing. She knew the censors would detect it soon. The hunt began. On the bridge of the censor command ship, an alarm chimed. It was not a loud sound. They despised such things. It was a soft, insistent pulse of light. A harmonic anomaly had been detected. It originated from the quarantined planet, Earth. Overcensor Thrax turned his large, dark eyes toward the main viewer. Thrax was the architect of the silence mandate on this world. He believed in it with absolute conviction. To him, music was a form of chaos, an impurity in the clean logic of the universe. The humans had been warned. They had been given a chance to join the cosmic harmony. They had chosen to cling to their noise. Now they would be taught the meaning of silence. Enforcer squads were dispatched. Their ships were sleek, black blades that cut through the atmosphere without a sound. Their mission was simple: find the source of the illegal broadcast, nullify the composer, and dismantle the network that carried their defiant tune. The hunt was systematic and brutal. Sensor patrols swept through cities. Their sensors were tuned to the specific frequencies of Alara's anthem. They could detect the faintest resonance. They raided hidden server farms. They arrested anyone with unauthorized communication gear. The whispers in the static began to fade. Fear was a powerful silencer. The resistance was being choked, but they could not find the source. The song was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a ghost they could not catch. For humanity, the hunt was terrifying. For Thrax, it was an infuriating puzzle. How could a primitive species hide a broadcast so effectively? He did not yet understand the nature of our orchestra. Our conductor was a man named Kalen. Before the silence, he was a world-renowned maestro. Now, he was the leader of the resistance. He operated from a forgotten substation deep underground. His command center was not filled with soldiers. It was filled with musicians and engineers. Their methods were Kalen's greatest composition. He had devised a network of quantumly entangled instruments. Dozens of pianos, violins, and cellos sat in hidden rooms across the planet. They were all linked at a subatomic level. When a key was pressed on one piano in London, The exact same key would depress on a piano in Tokyo, instantly, with no signal to intercept. Alara's anthem was not broadcast from one location. It was played simultaneously on every instrument in this quantum orchestra. The sensors were hunting for a single radio tower. We were giving them a planetary symphony. It was a performance on a scale they could not comprehend. Kalen watched the sensor patrol patterns on his screen. He conducted his invisible orchestra, a silent battle of wits and wills. He knew it was a temporary solution. The sensors were methodical. They would eventually figure it out. They needed a new strategy. They needed a way to fight back. Not just to hide, but to win. The maestro just needed to find the right note to play. Lyra of the Xylos continued to study the human song. Its emotional complexity fascinated her. It was a puzzle her logical mind was desperate to solve. She cross-referenced its structure with everything she knew about the sensors. Their biology, their history, their rigid telepathic network. Then she found it. A terrifying and enlightening truth. The sensors were not guardians of harmony. They were prisoners of it. Their entire species was linked in a hive mind, a constant, silent telepathic consensus. There were no individuals, only the whole. It was a state of perfect, logical order. But it was incredibly fragile. A single, powerful, unshared thought could cause a cascade failure. Our music was not a sonic disruption. It was a conceptual one. The combination of structured patterns and unpredictable emotion, it was a virus to their way of thinking. A human song could introduce the concept of individuality, a melody that one sensor might enjoy while another hated it. It could create a preference, a desire, a self. The silence mandate was not an act of arrogance. It was an act of existential fear. They had silenced countless worlds not to protect the cosmos, but to protect themselves from ideas. From the beautiful, chaotic noise of freedom. Lyra now understood. We were not just fighting for our culture. We were fighting for the very idea of a single, independent soul. And our weapon was a song. Kalen the maestro had an idea. It was a mad, desperate gamble. If our music could disrupt their minds, what could it do to their machines? He gathered his best engineers and sound technicians. They analyzed the sensor technology they had managed to salvage. Their ships, their weapons, their sensors, all operated on precise energy frequencies. They were stable and efficient, but they had no resonance dampeners. Why would they? In a silent universe, there was nothing to dampen. It was a flaw born from supreme arrogance. The resistance began to experiment. They took fragments of Alara's anthem. They shifted the pitch and altered the tempo. They searched for the right frequencies. The first test was small. A single modified chord was played through the quantum network. It was focused on a small sensor patrol drone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the drone's power core began to fluctuate wildly. Its anti-gravity engines sputtered. The cord had created a resonant feedback loop in its systems. The drone shuddered and then fell from the sky. It was a breakthrough. Our songs were not just a shield, they were a sword. The symphony became an act of sabotage. Specific harmonies were targeted at sensor energy grids. Whole city blocks under their control would suddenly go dark. Other melodies were designed to jam their communications, filling their channels with screeching, atonal feedback. We gave them noise. They had no idea how to handle it. It was beautiful chaos. Hope spread faster than any signal. The small victories of the resistance became legends whispered in quiet rooms. The symphony of sabotage grew bolder. The music was no longer just a secret broadcast for the faithful. It began to bleed into the open. It started with a single person humming on a public transport. A defiant, simple tune from Alara's anthem. A sensor enforcer turned to confront the offender. But then another person started humming, and another. Soon, the entire car was filled with the quiet, powerful melody. The enforcer was surrounded by the very chaos it was built to destroy. It did not know how to react. It was programmed to target a source. But the source was everywhere. This scene repeated across the planet. Workers in factories would tap out rhythms on pipes and machinery. Children in quiet parks would whistle the forbidden tunes. Entire cities began to hum. A low, persistent vibration of defiance that the sensors could not stop. It was a chorus of 1 billion voices, a planet remembering its own song. We were no longer just hiding. We were pushing back. The sound was still quiet, a murmur rather than a roar, but it was growing. The sensors had demanded silence. We were preparing to give them a symphony, and they were growing desperate. A cornered empire is a dangerous thing. Oversensor Thrax stood on the bridge of his flagship. The planet below was a canvas of failure. His enforcers were confused. Their technology was failing. The silent order he had imposed was crumbling into a persistent, humming chaos. He could feel it through the hive mind, a flicker of uncertainty, an alien concept that felt like poison. He would not allow it. This world's infection would not spread. He had one final, absolute solution. A weapon the sensors had deployed only twice before in their long history. It was called the nullification field, a device that did not just block sound. It erased the very concept of it from a planetary atmosphere. The device would be deployed in the upper atmosphere. Once activated, it would generate a field that canceled all acoustic vibrations. Sound waves would simply cease to exist. A bird's wings would make no noise. A falling tree would be silent. A human voice would be unable to produce a sound. It would be a permanent, irreversible silence. Thrax gave the order. The weapon began to power up. He would give this world the peace he had promised, the peace of a perfectly silent tomb. He watched the planet on his screen. He felt a grim satisfaction. Soon, there would be nothing left to hear, and the harmony of the hive mind would be safe once more. Lyra saw the energy signature from her listening post. She knew what it was. Her archives held records of the other 2 worlds the sensors had silenced. The data was horrifying. The sudden, total silence had driven the inhabitants mad. Their societies had collapsed in a matter of days. She could not let that happen again. She had to make a choice: to remain an observer or to interfere. The Xylos code was strict. You watch, you record, but you never act. To break that law was to be exiled, to be cut off from her people and her purpose forever. She looked at the data stream from Earth. She listened again to Alara's anthem, a song full of hope and defiance. She thought about the cold, empty logic of the sensors. She chose the chaos. She chose the song. Breaking every protocol she had ever known, she began analyzing the sensor weapon. It was a resonance device. It worked by broadcasting a specific, complex anti-frequency. And like any resonance device, it had a breaking point. It had a core resonant frequency, a single pure tone that, if matched and amplified, would overload its systems. It would create a feedback loop that would shatter the device from the inside. Finding that frequency was nearly impossible. But Lyra had the raw energy readings. She had the processing power of an archivist's starship. And she had a desperate motivation. She worked frantically, racing against the weapon's charge time. Finally, she found it. A single, perfect note. She encoded it and sent it on a tight beam transmission, a message aimed at a hidden substation deep beneath the Earth. The message arrived in Kalen's command center. It was a simple data packet. A single audio frequency and a Xylos mathematical proof explaining its significance. The maestro stared at it. He did not know who sent it. He did not know how they knew. But he understood what it meant. This was their chance. Their one and only chance. He sent the frequency to Alara. Her silent room was now the most important place on the planet. The message appeared on her screen. The core frequency of the sensor's ultimate weapon. She looked at the sequence of notes that made up her anthem. She saw the story of her people. Now she had to write the final chapter. She needed to craft a counterpoint, a new harmony that would weave around her existing melody. This new harmony had to be powerful. It had to be precise. It had to be built around that single alien note. A note that could either save them or doom them. If she got it wrong, it would do nothing. If she got it right, it could shatter their final weapon. She began to work. Her fingers flew across the silent keyboard. Colors flashed on the light board. She was no longer just a composer. She was a warrior forging a weapon of song. She integrated the new frequency. It was a strange, haunting note. But she found a way to make it ours. She wrapped it in human chords. She gave it a human rhythm. The anthem was transformed. It was no longer just a vessel for history. It was now a weapon of liberation, a song that could break their silence forever. The time had come. There were no more secrets, no more whispers. Kalen sent the completed anthem across every network. The quantum orchestra was prepared. But this time, it was not their only instrument. The song was sent to every phone, every television, every public address system, every speaker on the planet that still worked. The instructions were simple. When the signal comes, play this song. Play it as loud as you can. And if you have no speaker, then sing. Kalen stood at his podium in the deep earth. He was not just conducting a hidden orchestra. He was conducting a planet. The sensor weapon was reaching full power. A visible shimmer began to appear in the upper atmosphere. The silence was coming. Then, Kalen gave the signal. And the planet answered. From the highest mountains to the deepest valleys, the song erupted. It poured from apartment windows in Tokyo. It blasted from car radios in Cairo. It echoed through the ancient streets of Rome. And where there were no speakers, people opened their mouths. They sang in 1,000 different languages. But they all sang the same defiant tune. It was a global crescendo, a wave of sound that rolled across the surface of the world, a single, unified chorus of 8 billion souls. We were one voice, one orchestra, one heart beating to the rhythm of Alara's anthem. The sound rose to meet the descending silence, a final battle between a song and its absence. The wave of sound hit the nullification field. For a moment, there was a terrible, crushing pressure, a feeling like the world was holding its breath. The sensor weapon tried to cancel our song, but Alara's counterpoint, that single, perfect note, found its target. It resonated with the core of the sensor device. The feedback loop began. On the bridge of the flagship, oversensor Thrax watched in disbelief. A fracture of light appeared on the nullification device. The single note from the planet below was amplifying itself within his weapon. The fracture grew. It splintered into a web of cracks. The single note became a scream. Then, the device shattered. The resulting resonant wave was not silent. It was a psychic shockwave that traveled backward along the energy stream. It slammed into the sensor fleet. The wave was not physical, it was conceptual. It was the pure, weaponized chaos of human music. It struck their hive mind. The telepathic network that bound them together broke. For the first time in their lives, every sensor was an individual. They were alone in their own minds, flooded with alien concepts, fear, confusion, wonder. Their ships, deprived of their unified command, drifted aimlessly. Their fleet was broken. Their control was shattered, not by a bomb, but by a chorus. The retreat was pathetic. The great obsidian ships that had dominated our skies now limped away. They moved erratically, without their perfect, silent geometry. They were a broken empire, fleeing from a sound they could not comprehend. We watched them go, and we kept singing. Our song did not stop at the edge of our atmosphere. It traveled outward, a sphere of defiant music expanding into the void. Alara's anthem became a beacon, a message to anyone else listening in the great, dark expanse. A message that we were here, that we were loud, and that we were free. Lyra, the Xylos archivist, recorded it all. She labeled the recording, Earth Anthem of Soul. It became the most requested item in the Great Library, a testament to a species that was told to be quiet, and responded by teaching the stars a new song. We still sing it, to remember what we almost lost, and to remind ourselves that a single voice can be a whisper. But together, we are a roar.